This episode of Musical Hell is brought to you by Midnight Musicals. Welcome to the podcast Musical Underground. Thank you. Greetings, mortals. Welcome to another session of the Infernal Court in Musical Hell. I'm Diva, your judge, jury, executioner, and here's a hot take for you. Musician biopics are a lot better when they don't take themselves so seriously. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of good, moody, dramatic portraits of famous performers, but after a while the Oscar bait portrayals of sex, drugs, and whatever genre the subject happens to specialize in start to feel a little routine. So I fully welcome the current trend of musician biographies that feel free to have a little fun. Rocket Man puts a tongue-in-cheek spin on Elton John's life, Elvis uses Tom Parker as an unreliable narrator to fuel its spectacle, and Weird follows Al Yankovic's style by being a straight-up parody of the whole genre. They may not be perfect, but they're definitely entertaining, which is a lot more than I can say for our next offender, Nina. Granted, if you're going to do a movie about a famous musician, you'd be hard-pressed to find a subject more worthy than Nina Simone, a gifted Juilliard-trained pianist who found the world of classical music close to her because of her race, an outspoken civil rights advocate who used her art as a firebrand, a volatile personality who struggled with what was eventually diagnosed as bipolar disorder, and an inimitable artist who gave definitive renditions of both standards and original compositions. But this 2016 attempt is largely forgettable, apart from the controversy it stirred up by casting Zoe Saldana in the title role, which, well, we will discuss that further as we examine the case of Nina. The movie begins with a quick summary of Simone's life, beginning in 1946 North Carolina, where a young Nina refuses to give a piano recital for her mostly white audience until her parents are allowed to sit in the front instead of standing at the back, then jumping ahead to 1965, where she performs Feeling Good at the height of her career, interspersed with shots of adoring fans and images of her top records and headlines.
Stars when you shine, you know how I feel. Scent of the pine, you know how I feel.
Most of the film takes place during the last decade of Nina's life, but there will be flashbacks to other periods throughout, and sin number one is that they don't really contribute much to the story. At worst, it's a violation of show don't tell, particularly in the motif of Nina being interviewed by a French journalist. At the best, they're interesting anecdotes about Simone's life. She was friends with a Raisin in the Sun playwright Lorraine Hansberry, she gave hugs to a young Richard Pryor when he was dealing with stage fright, but they don't provide context or relevance to the main narrative. It's not necessary to show the full breadth of a historic figure's life to create a nuanced portrait of them. Ma Rainey's Black Bottom manages it over the span of a couple of hours, but Nina doesn't trust us to understand anything about her unless we're shown it. What we are shown has issues of its own, but we'll come to that. But apart from that, let's get right to the behemoth in the room with the casting of Zoe Saldana as Nina Simone. When production of the film was first announced in 2010, Mary J. Blige was attached to the title role. And while she's not a dead ringer for Simone, you can see how she might have pulled it off. Blige walked 2 years later as the project struggled with funding, and Saldana was cast instead, which, as the kids these days say, was a choice. One that earned the condemnation of Simone's estate, her daughter Simone Kelly, her fans, and social justice advocates across the internet. And they do have a point. Simone was attractive, but it wasn't the Eurocentric beauty favored by Hollywood, and she owned that. Her song, For Women, is a sharp critique of how black women are judged and categorized based on their appearance. It's hard to imagine she would be okay with the lighter-skinned Saldana playing her in a movie. And when Saldana was heavily made up in order to bring her closer to the real Simone's appearance, yeah, I shouldn't need to explain why that raised eyebrows. It's worth noting that Saldana has since acknowledged she was not a good fit for the role, and writer-director Cynthia Mort instigated legal action for being cut out of the production process, so, as is quite often the case, this is yet another sin we can lay at the feet of our good friend executive meddling. The main body of the story starts in 1995, when Nina and her manager Henri Edwards are visiting a lawyer to discuss the royalties for her work. The lawyer claims that the rights to her music have been sold and there's nothing he can do about it, and Nina does not take that well.
Give me the money.
Jesus Christ, Nina!
Tell them to give me my money. Tell him to give me my money!
As Nina is forcibly and dramatically wrestled into a psychiatric ward, a doctor explains her litany of issues: anger, paranoia, substance abuse, the usual. The white nurses are ignorant of who their patient is, but a nice black orderly by the name of Clifton Henderson bonds with her and helps her get back on her meds.
Where you from?
Chicago.
As Nina improves, Clifton urges her to rejoin the world, and Nina agrees. But she wants Clifton to join her as her assistant. He's a bit skeptical at first, but she gives him a good advance on his salary, so he figures it probably beats emptying bedpans. They jet across the ocean to Provence, where Clifton's first look at Nina's home is less than encouraging. Although it honestly looks as grimy and washed out as everything else in the movie, so I'm not sure how he can tell a difference. The whole film, whether it's the buttoned-up post-war South or the transgressive 1960s or the candy-colored 90s, has the exact same feel to it. The faded, dusty palette of an awards-bait film that's afraid that if it doesn't look grim and bleak, you won't take it seriously. Predictably, Clifton finds Nina difficult at first. She's demanding, refuses to eat or take her medication, and his attempts to water down her daily champagne nearly get him brained with the bottle. But he's persistent and makes headway on some of his efforts, though not all of them.
But I'm not gonna take the drugs. I don't like the way they make me feel, baby.
Destabilize you.
I don't want to be stabilized. I want to feel free.
I'm not sure if this is supposed to be Nina spouting the old psychiatric medication turns you into an emotionless zombie and kills creativity canard, or if Mort actually believes it. Either way, it goes unchallenged in the movie and therefore is sin number 4. Later, Clifton is rifling through some of Nina's memorabilia when he gets a call from Edwards saying he has Nina booked at a club in Paris. Clifton doubts Nina is in any condition to perform, but Edwards is all, so she's a substance-abusing prima donna, that's show business, just make sure she shows up, okay? So it's all aboard the accordion music transition express for Nina and Clifton. One of the band members gives Clifton an angry bilingual rant about the set list, which is far longer than Nina or any of them agreed to. But Edwards brushes off Clifton's concerns, and Nina takes the stage to a generally indifferent audience, which results in her taking a knife to said audience.
Talk now, motherfucker!
Back at her home, Clifton confronts Nina about her behavior. Sort of.
What happened, Nina? Why are you here and not in America? Why do you keep your money under your mattress and not in a bank account?
Without looking, I'm going to guess her problem is equal parts untreated neurodivergence and deep trauma from a lifetime of dealing with open systemic racism, but honestly, this movie isn't really interested in answering Clifton's question. Nina Simone was by any measure an extraordinary woman, talented, troubled, outspoken, and unpredictable, but this movie only skims the same surface as so many biopics before it.
The fish-lipped guy turned increasingly to booze, drugs, womanizing, and out-of-control gambling.
At no point do we really get into the meat of what makes Nina who she is. We're told that she was friends with Lorraine Hansberry and wrote To Be Young, Gifted, and Black in her honor, but not that Hansberry was instrumental in shaping her social and political conscience, nor that Hansberry died tragically young of pancreatic cancer, a fact which feels like it would be relevant when Nina is facing her own bout with the big C. We're told that she was deeply affected by the death of Martin Luther King Jr. and performed Why the King of Love is Dead at a tribute to him, but not that she generally tended more towards Malcolm X's side of the spectrum and how her songs were so confrontational as to be banned in several states. Most importantly, we never get a good examination between the intersection between Nina's mental illness and the world in which she lived. While it's true that bipolar disorder can serve some explanation for her violent outbursts, it's also true that she had a lot to be angry about. She was a prominent civil rights figure at a time when they were being targeted by everyone from the KKK to the FBI, and a black musician who was very familiar with the institutional racism and exploitation in her field. As the saying says, it's not paranoia if they really are out to get you. There is so much potential in Simone's life that the movie barely touches on, if not outright ignores, and that's almost more frustrating than its headline-grabbing casting issues. It's not long before Nina's mood swings back to the manic side and she takes Clifton with her to Nice, where she receives a much better reception from the locals. She also tries to get Clifton into bed with her, but he declines. More on that later. So she settles for chatting up another random guy while Clifton third wheels. Helping Nina hook up with one-night stands turns out to be the last straw for Clifton, and he leaves her to go back to his family in Chicago, where he spends his days moping on the couch and watching footage of Nina that is very obviously a 21st century video with a color filter over it.
His face, so soft and wondrous fair.
For her own part, Nina is fielding calls from her oncologist that she'd rather not deal with, so she goes to visit the Hendersons in Chicago and asks Clifton to be her manager. By which I mean she sweeps in, takes the whole family to dinner, and announces Clifton as her new manager without consulting him on the subject. But this, and a rendition of I Put a Spell on You, is as close to an apology as Clifton is going to get. And besides, as his mom points out, temperamental music icons jetting halfway across the world with job offers don't just fall out of the sky every day. So it's back to France and their usual routine.
You don't understand.
Then tell me.
It's so damn bright in here, Clifton.
Clifton gets to work trying to book Nina, only to find out she's alienated pretty much every venue owner in France and none of them want anything to do with her. In desperation, he reaches out to Edwards for advice, but the only direction Edwards has to offer him is incredibly vague.
She has to deliver truth again. If she does, she can do whatever she wants. She's Nina Simone.
So Clifton attempts to get Nina cleaned up and...
Like this. It's good for your diaphragm.
The fact that there's kind of a get back in shape sequence in this movie is bad enough, but worse is that it really doesn't serve a purpose. Nina doesn't change. In fact, she coldly rejects the vocal coach Clifton brings in, which could have been a funny subversion if the script had capitalized on it. And there's not much difference in Nina's performing style throughout the movie, so there's nothing to suggest that Clifton's influence, or lack thereof, is important. But as we enter the third act, Nina appears to have turned things around, giving a good show at the one club still willing to take her, doing a recording session, getting intimate with Clifton. Wait, what? The whole controversy regarding the casting of Simone in this movie largely overshadowed the fact that its treatment of Clifton Henderson is pretty questionable as well. The real Henderson was Simone's manager and confidant during the last years of her life, but any suggestion that there was a romantic or sexual connection between the two of them is absurd for a simple reason. Henderson was openly gay and in a long-term relationship, a fact which the movie ignores almost entirely, apart from a rather unkind term Nina uses when Clifton turns down her offer of sexy times. And straight-washing Henderson so the movie can play unresolved sexual tension is bad enough on its own terms, but it again misses out on the fantastic potential inherent in portraying these two individuals. How does Clifton's life as an AIDS epidemic-era gay man compare to Nina's experiences during the Civil Rights era? How does the intersectionality between racial, women's, and LGBTQ issues influence Nina and Clifton's perspectives? There is a really good story waiting to be told here, and it frustrates me that this movie is doing everything it can to avoid it. Speaking of bad storytelling, Clifton eventually learns that Nina has been diagnosed with breast cancer in the most awkward manner.
Well, I take care of all of Nina's affairs. You can talk to me.
Okay, well then, there's certain things you should know.
I do not have the time or energy to look up mid-90s health privacy law in France, so I can't speak to the legality of this situation, but I'm pretty sure don't go blabbing your patient's diagnosis to whoever answers the phone, no matter who they say they are, has long been medical ethics 101. Clifton is pretty upset at the whole situation, but Nina is rather blasé as she figures cancer can't do anything worse to her body than she's been doing to it herself. Nevertheless, at his urging, she undergoes a treatment montage. She also receives a tape from her estranged daughter. Nina has an estranged daughter, by the way, hoping that she will return to the States to perform, and this convinces her to go along with a concert in Central Park that Clifton has been proposing. They need to seek out Edwards for funding, and he's a smug white asshole about it because his job is to be the movie's smug white asshole.
If you want to play in your living room, you can be as big an asshole as you want. There.
But Nina proves more than a match for him, so with Clifton's support, she takes the stage in New York. And honestly, it's kind of anticlimactic. We know, and the movie knows, that this resurgence will be a brief one and that cancer will take Simone's life in a few years. Which would be fine if there was any sense of completion or validation in her return to a country that let her down so many times. But it just feels rote and hollow, as obligatory as the narrative text summarizing Simone's career and influence at the movie's conclusion. Which is a very ordinary way to end a movie about a very unique woman.
Where you gonna run to? Where you gonna run to? All along that day.
Movies about real-life people always sand down the edges to some extent, because real people are complicated and don't always fit into the neat roles of a narrative. But seldom has it been done so extensively and to so little benefit than in Nina. Not only does it ignore so much of what made Nina Simone who she was in favor of a paint-by-numbers biopic plot, it can't even tell that plot with any degree of effectiveness. I'm going to side with Cynthia Mort and lay the blame of this on the producers, who are condemned to an eternity of the most racially inappropriate performances ever committed to film. So let it be recorded. This session of the Infernal Court in musical hell is now adjourned.